there was in the early 90s, mid 90s, there was Iridium that came along. There was the assembly of the space station, which for a while I was interested in because nobody thought the space shuttle could do what it was said it was going to do on the schedule it was going to do. The assembly of an international consortium to do the space station and to take some of the resources out of the military and industrial complex in the former Soviet Union and put that to a little bit better use, right? Than making strategic missiles. That was a pull covering via the entry in the space sector, the emergence of Russia from the former Soviet Union, how Kazakhstan and Ukraine separated with a whole lot more of the assets than I thought because I didn't know much. And then since then, what's Russia going to do? They don't export many things very well, but they do export some space technology very well. And so that's been a big deal. As I told you, China has decided to make space a big deal in its industrial policy and its foreign policy. And they are one of the few nations, maybe there are only two right now, that can really, if they want to show a lot of muscle and make an industry work, they can do it on their own. The United States can too, but I don't know that anybody else can. At some point, India will probably be able to, but not right now. And so that's bringing China was interesting. How Europe tries to find itself with a single voice on occasion because it's forced to with the space industry. France cannot do the Ariane rockets all by itself. It needs Germany. It needs Italy. And so that's been fascinating to watch. And as I said, the deployment of broadband now with Wi-Fi hotspots and rural broadband and cellular backhaul to areas that 20 years ago couldn't have dreamed of having anything like what you and I take for granted. And that is coming. That is happening right before our eyes, and it's great to see. I don't think I can do much better than what should be a standard journalist response. Keep bullshit down to a minimum. You can't get it down to zero, but keep it to a minimum. Understand that you can get away with most journalists most of the time, particularly now because the journalism profession has changed a lot and the correlation of forces has changed a lot. It's not in the favor of journalists in the last 20 years. You can get away with an awful lot, but there's a reasonable chance that down the road that will come a cropper for you because you will have a journalist or a shareholder or a regulatory agency or somebody find out what you haven't been willing to say. Whereas if you'd said it earlier on, the pain for everyone, including you and your company and your shareholders, would have been lesser. Most people don't. Most corporate chieftains don't follow that lesson because they think they don't need to. And I have to think that a lot of times they're right. Not all stupidity goes punished. Not all malfeasance goes punished. And not all lies are found out. You can get away an awful lot in this world, can't you? I know that if you cover a sector, which I have for a long enough time, you're going to run into people who've dedicated themselves into double and quadruple bypass territory by working so hard on a given project and seeing that project go up in an explosion, which has happened. I've seen it. Once you get close to that experience, you cannot wish failure on anyone ever. There's just too much blood and sweat and tears that goes into it. And a lot of these projects are like the station, like certain launcher developments, take years, and these people really do work like dogs. Some of them get paid pretty well. Nonetheless, they work like dogs. Ask their families. And that's been interesting to see. And then you get a payoff. You get a payoff like curiosity. You get a payoff like a bloody helicopter on the surface of Mars, and that's a hell of a payoff. You get a payoff in saying I I helped make this. I mean, this is focusing on an industry where engineers rule has been fascinating for me, because engineers are really, it's what we do best on planet Earth, I think. We're not so good at taking care of each other and not getting angry and that sort of thing, and going to war and income, distribution, that sort of thing. What we are good at is building stuff. And when it works, when it clicks, it's really a marvel to see. And you forget sometimes that behind everything you're looking at was thousands and thousands of hours of work by people who didn't know whether it was going to work, whose managers might have said it at one time or another, I want to stop this, I want to kill this, it's too long, but who made it work. And it's really neat to see that. You shouldn't be, as a journalist, we can't be blinded to the failures and to the cost overruns and to the delays and all that stuff. Nonetheless, when they make it click, just from a human point of view, it's great to see. I've been told months after a story appears, months, particularly in Europe, where they don't like calling you up, and they'll just wait till they see you at the next cocktail party or the next conference. So this is months saying that someone was devastated by something I wrote. And I'll remember the story, and I won't remember anything particularly devastating. And I'll ask them what it was and then try to get to the bottom of it. And when I reread the story, the thing that most upset them was something I didn't care about. If I'd known it was going to upset them that much, I would have taken it out, not because I'm compromising myself and my scruples, but because it didn't mean much. And I remember there was in the 50s, 60s, there was a famous Chicago journalist named Mike Royko, and I have a book of his columns, and he tells a story where he was an investigator. He was a tough bastard, investigative journalist who had a column, and a mid-level bureaucrat working in an accounting office in City Hall, he found out was taking money from the books, okay, and then massaging the books so that disappearance wasn't easy to find. And he found out about this. And he went to the guy and said, here's the thing. You have 6 months to pay that money back, and I need, or something like that. And I'm not going to write anything about this, but you should know that the same sources that gave me the information about what you have done will be looking around at your work to make sure you don't do that again. And explaining why he did that, he said, I can get a little excitement and exclusive and ruin this guy's life. Guy had wife and children. Or I can make good the wrong that he committed against the public interest. Have him pay the money back, have him scare the bejesus out of him, which is likely to deter future similar activity, and we go on. Do I really want to put a hand grenade to this guy's life? No. And I thought, Jesus, that's just right. We'll start with the things that I think that can happen as a business model now. I'm pretty much sure they can, with a little government assistance, but that's okay. Government's assisting all kinds of industries all the time. So broadband everywhere. We talked about that. Broadband everywhere. And I mean everywhere. There is no excuse for somebody in the middle of Jonesville, Idaho, not to have an internet connection. There's really no excuse. And if it means government incentive payments, so be it. So be it. Look at all the incentive payments they're giving to fiber development all these years. So that's one. And multiply that out by 205 nations and territories. That's one. Two is how to use satellite technology to coalesce among the world's biggest, most powerful nations a consensus on how to measure greenhouse gases, carbon and CO2 and methane mainly, in a way that is agreed to. Nobody questions the figures, and that satellite networks data can then be used to enforce regulations about carbon emissions. That's the next big step. That's a big, big leap. But again, I mentioned this a lot. Remember the Montreal Protocol for ozone emissions? That worked. It can be done. I think a lot of people today forget how many big things we've been able to, as a species, accomplish in the last 100 years. The level of poverty going way down. Number of people who die of hunger every day, way down. It's remarkable. So that's another big one. A third one might be, if you believe, as I think I do, or if you're concerned that there's going to be a lot of failures in the space sector in the next, say, 48 months, depending on what the Federal Reserve does and interest rates, depending on how a certain number of technologies go, et cetera, depending on the patience of investors, then what you want to look for, what we all want to look for, is to make sure that those who have businesses that should succeed can succeed. That they're not, we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And there's a lot of bathwater, I think, getting funding now, not because they're bad companies, but because there are too many of them doing similar things. And some of them are doing things that just don't deserve the kind of valuations that they're getting. So that's another big thing. Whether we have the same thing we had around 2000, with a lot of interesting companies suffering because some of the more wild ideas are going to fail. And in that tumult, a lot of good things go down as well as others. And then the last thing, I guess, as a business area, everybody talks about Wall Street analysts talking about $1 trillion space economy. I've never held much to those forecasts, but there does seem to be, for the moment, a real government push to make at least the solar system, starting with the moon, a place where business can be done. And I can hardly wait to see some of the things that are going to come out of that. One of my complaints about the International Space Station is if you talk to some of the people who are managing experiments done there, they're producing some really interesting stuff. They're doing a bad job of selling it. I really think they are. I think the average American, or the average European, the average Canadian, the average Japanese doesn't know what the hell they're getting out of the space station, except a couple of attractive astronauts going up and down now and again. But they're doing some very interesting things, and so I think managing an industry in low Earth orbit, eventually mineral extraction and return to Earth. I don't know whether I'm going to see that in my lifetime as a real business, but we can start making the baby steps now toward it. And I was very happy to see the next, the post space station scenario, which NASA is leading. I'm hoping that the Chinese can eventually get involved with that at some point while retaining their own national identity, much as Russia did on the space station. But the whole Artemis effort with the moon, that's a really cool start. And we'll see how many companies can withstand the graveyard that follows a lot of R&D efforts that now have to stand on their own and make businesses. That valley of death they've got to go through before they become profitable businesses after they get their R&D funding, after that washes out, is a scary piece. I started a company 4 years ago, and so I know what a startup is and the kind of nail-biting days you got to go through. And so a lot of companies are going to go through that. So I think that's one real thing to watch for. And inside of that, I really want to insist on having the United States and China go through their own Apollo Soyuz moment, right, where they find a way, despite everything, and without ceding important points like what their cultures are, that sort of thing, can find a way to work together to the general advantage.